서점에서 한국문학 코너라고 해서 따로 한국문학만 모은 그 사진을 볼 때 제일 실감이 나고요. 많은 분들이 처음에는 K-pop, 뭐 한국 드라마, 영화부터 시작해서 그 연장선상에서 문학으로 넘어오는 분이 많은 것 같아요. 예를 들어서 K-pop 가사를 듣고 이 정서가 너무 좋다. 그러면은 이 정서가 있는 세계를 더 알고 싶다 해서 깊이 알고 싶다 해서 문학 세계로 뛰어들어 주시는 것 같고 한국어를 공부하는 분도 많고 한국 문학을 공부하는 분들도 많아진 것 같아요. 한국 문학은 지금 현대 일본 문학이랑 비교를 하면 한국 문학이 더 쏘는 맛이 있다라고 말을 할 수 있는 것 같아요. 네, 그게 한국어라는 언어가 갖고 있는 매력, 그 언어가 갖고 있는 직설함도 연관이 돼 있다고 생각합니다. 한국 문학은 항상 발전 중에 있다고 생각하고 전투적이라고 생각해요. 그 한국 문학이 항상 그 현실 세계에 대해서 무릎을 던지고 있는데 그 힘이 아주 강력하다고 생각합니다. 그러니까 한국어랑 일본어가 어순이 같아 해서 어학으로서 학습을 하는 분들이 많은데 번역은 다른 거거든요. 그래서 어순이 같다고 해서 번역을 할 수 있는 것도 아니고 그래서 번역을 하다 보면 뭔가 설명을 넣어야 된다는 부분이 분명히 나오는데 그게 작품마다 양을 얼마나 넣을 거고 어디까지 설명을 해야 되고 어디까지 범위를 넣어야 될까라는 거를 처음에 설정을 해야 돼요. 그래서 한국어와 일본어는 분명히 다르다라는 거를 항상 염두에 두고 진행을 해야 된다. 긴장감을 유지해야 된다라고 말씀드리고 싶어요. 번역을 하면서 느끼는 거는 제가 글을 원래 좋아하지만 그 번역이라는 작업을 통해서 많은 작가님 그리고 작품들을 만나게 돼서 저도 죽기 전에는 그 제가 존경하는 작가님들처럼 글다운 글을 한 줄이라도 쓰고 싶다. 네, 그게 제 꿈입니다.
In our headlines on this Monday, June 23rd, here in South Korea. The US strikes 3 Iranian nuclear sites, including Fordo, in the wee hours of Saturday local time, and Donald Trump claims monumental damage was caused. In response, Iran's parliament votes to close the Strait of Hormuz, a shipping lane that accounts for the daily flow of roughly a fifth of the global oil supply. Meanwhile, after much contemplation, President Jae-myung decides to decline the invitation to this year's NATO summit in the Netherlands this week. The U.S. launched airstrikes against 3 Iranian nuclear facilities this past weekend, and Donald Trump asserts the attacks caused substantial damage. Our Kim Jong-sil has the latest.
U.S. President Donald Trump called the damage to Iran's nuclear sites monumental in a Truth Social post on Sunday night, reiterating his earlier claim that they had been obliterated. Satellite images show craters at Fordo and collapsed buildings at Esfahan and Natanz. The U.S. Operation Midnight Hammer involved over 125 aircraft, including B-2 bombers, as well as Tomahawk missiles launched from a U.S. submarine. President Trump confirmed the strikes on Saturday evening from the White House.
Tonight, I can report to the world that the strikes were a spectacular military success. Iran's key nuclear enrichment facilities have been completely and totally obliterated. Iran, the bully of the Middle East, must now make peace.
While the full extent of the damage is still being assessed, Iranian officials have downplayed the impact, claiming the facilities were evacuated before the bombs hit. The strikes were carried out just days after President Trump's initial announcement of a 2-week window to decide on military action. U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio defended the action, saying it needed to be done.
And I think the world today is safer and more stable than it was 24 hours ago. And a bunch of these countries putting out statements condemning us privately, they all agree with us that this needed to be done.
Rubio echoed Trump's message, saying the door to negotiations remains open, but Iran must choose between peaceful nuclear energy or facing continued military pressure. He added that if Iran persists in becoming a nuclear power, it would put the regime at risk. Meanwhile, UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres urged restraint on Sunday, warning that the U.S. strikes could lead to further escalation and calling for diplomacy to avoid more violence. Kim Jong-sil, Arirang News.
Now, in response to the U.S. air assaults against its nuclear facilities, the Iranian parliament has voted in support of closing the Strait of Hormuz, a crucial shipping lane for the world's daily oil and gas supply. Our Lee Seung-jae reports.
The United States over the weekend attacked 3 key Iranian nuclear sites with B-2 stealth bombers, dropping more than a dozen bunker buster bombs. In response, Iran's parliament on Sunday endorsed a measure to close the Strait of Hormuz, a major global transit checkpoint. According to Iran's state-run broadcaster Press TV on Sunday, the country's legislature reached a consensus to close the strait, with the final decision resting on the Supreme National Security Council and the Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei. The Strait of Hormuz, which separates Iran and Oman, is a key gateway for oil shipments from Persian Gulf countries. It's estimated that around 25% of the global crude oil supply and 20% of the liquefied natural gas supply pass through the strait. South Korea, which is heavily reliant on crude from the Middle East, could be heavily impacted by the closure, as the Korea Trade Investment Promotion Agency analyzes that 99% of Middle Eastern crude oil coming to Korea passes through the strait. Meanwhile, in an interview with NBC News on Sunday, U.S. Vice President J.D. Vance said it would be suicidal for Iran if they blocked off the major trade route. Vance argued that Iran's entire economy runs through the strait, and such action would not only cause global disruption, but also destroy their own economy. Despite the direct U.S. involvement in the ongoing Iran-Israel conflict, Vance says Washington wants peace with Iran in the context of them not having a nuclear weapons program. Lee Seung-jae, Arirang News.
Indeed, South Korea relies on that strait for 99% of its crude oil from the Middle East. Accordingly, Iran's intentions to close the channel is causing much concern here in the country. Our Shin Se-byuk has details.
Tensions are rising in the Middle East with growing fears over the potential fallout for South Korea's economy. On Sunday, Iran announced it would move to block the Strait of Hormuz in response to a U.S. strike on its nuclear facilities. The Strait of Hormuz is a narrow sea passage connecting the Persian Gulf and the Gulf of Oman. It plays a vital role in global energy flows, with roughly 20 to 25% of the world's crude oil exports and around 20% of LNG shipments passing through it. A full blockade would disrupt global energy supply chains and send shockwaves through oil markets, hitting energy-dependent economies like South Korea especially hard. According to the Korea Trade Investment Promotion Agency, 99% of Middle Eastern crude imported to Korea travels through the Strait of Hormuz. An expert warned that if Iran's response escalates, the price of oil hitting the $100 per barrel mark would only be a matter of time, raising concerns about broader market volatility.
The bigger risk is not just rising oil prices, but how long the stock market stays under pressure. A severe drop in Korean and global stocks could have an even greater impact on the economy.
He also pointed to the currency market, saying the Bank of Korea may face limits on policy flexibility.
If the won weakens to 1450 or even 1500 per dollar during a prolonged crisis, the central bank simply won't be able to lower rates without fueling further currency instability.
A prolonged military standoff between the U.S., Israel, and Iran could also drag Korea's economic growth well below current projections. The Bank of Korea's latest forecast, released late last month, projected economic growth of 0.8% for this year. That would be the lowest in 5 years, excluding major crisis periods like the COVID-19 pandemic or past financial shocks. But since the forecast was issued before the U.S. strike, the risk of a deeper downturn remains. Meanwhile, with uncertainty mounting, the government held an emergency interagency meeting on Monday. It says it will crack down on unfair oil price hikes and keep domestic fuel prices in check. Authorities also plan to closely monitor financial markets and act quickly if volatility spikes. Key sectors like finance, energy, trade, and logistics will be watched around the clock with swift responses to any unexpected developments. 신세벽, Arirang News.
Also, in related news, President Lee Jae-myung presided over his first meeting with his senior aides and placed priority on preparations to respond to the broader potential fallout of the violence in the Middle East. Our top office correspondent Yoon Jung-min reports.
Defining the crises in the Middle East as urgent. The focus of President Lee's first meeting with his top aides at the start of the week was on these and their potential impact on the nation.
대통령실을 비롯해서 전 부처가 비상 대응 체계를 좀 갖춰서 비상한 대응을 해야 될 것으로 생각이 됩니다. 특히 현지의 우리 국민들의 안전 대책이 반드시 필요하겠습니다.
Also discussed were ways to tackle instability in the foreign exchange and financial markets, noting that already high prices might further inflict pain on the people if coupled with higher oil prices. Lee asked for additional measures with regard to the government's recent supplementary budget proposal, if needed, now awaiting approval at the National Assembly. And as the president held this first meeting under a new government, without a transition period, his message to them was specific.
대통령실 업무가 지금 아직 인원도 충분히 다 확정되지 못한 단계이고 또 인력도 좀 부족해서 아마 다들 많이 힘들 겁니다. 그러긴 하지만 언제나 말씀드린 것처럼 여러분의 한 시간이 5,200만 시간의 가치가 있다.
On Sunday, President Lee Jae-myung decided not to attend the upcoming NATO summit this week in The Hague, hours after the U.S. bombed nuclear sites in Iran over the weekend. He considered participating in the summit, but after long consideration, a final call was made at the last minute. Observers believe the latest incident could have complicated any possible talks between President Lee and his U.S. counterpart, Donald Trump, with the U.S. deadline for tariff negotiations looming. Yoon Jung-min, Arirang News.
And earlier on this Monday morning, President Lee Jae-myung spoke on the phone with Malaysian Prime Minister Anwar Ibrahim. Now, according to presidential spokesperson Kang Yoo-jung, the two leaders did so to celebrate 65 years of diplomatic relations and shared hopes of further advancing their strategic partnership, which was upgraded last year. They agreed to bolster mutually beneficial cooperation in trade, investment and defense, with renewed efforts to seal a free trade deal within this year. FTA negotiations resumed in March 2024 after a 5-year pause. On the trade front, exports expanded over 8% on year during the first 20 days of June, driven by demand for chips. According to the Korea Customs Service on this Monday, outbound shipments amounted to almost $38.7 billion during this period, as shipments of semiconductors surged close to 22% on year. What's more, exports of passenger cars rose 9% on year, while exports of ships soared nearly 48%. Officials linked the favorable findings to the reality that the impact of U.S. tariffs has yet to fully kick in. In neighboring Japan, the Korea Pavilion at the Osaka Expo drew over 1 million visitors as of this past Sunday. The pavilion opened on April 13th when the expo began and is hosting some 30 events to share Korea's advanced technology and cultural heritage. It also features a large media wall that screens videos of diverse aspects of South Korea. More than 150 countries are taking part in the Osaka Expo, which runs until October 13th. Meanwhile, Seoul recently played host to a festival in celebration of the Korean wave, and my colleague Pyongyang was there to take a look.
Korean culture isn't just about K-pop, just as K-pop isn't only about singing and dancing. It's about storytelling, identity, and connection. Hallyu, or the Korean wave, has turned Korea's pop culture into a global bridge, uniting fans, industries, and ideas across borders. That is what the 2025 MyK Festa represents.
Where I'm standing right now is K Street, a sprawling exhibition and experience zone showcasing over 100 Korean companies. From webtoons and food to lifestyle brands, attendees can get a hands-on feel for K content and also everyday Korean culture, and do a little shopping along the way.
On K Street, there was something for everyone.
I think what I like the most is very diverse. I can see K-beauty booth, I can see K-fashion, K-pop, K-food. They also have like color analysis, so I really like going around and like seeing everything that Korea has to offer.
Well, first I went to see the newbie fan sign, and then I just attended with my friends so I could see all the different booths and kind of see what the sellers are offering.
At the food zone, visitors tried food from popular brands that were carefully selected to reflect Korean food trends and appeal to foreigners as well.
K street food, like all the food trucks, it was so good. Like especially the tteokbokki. Like I love Korean food, so tteokbokki stood out like the most for me.
An export consultation event also took place, connecting Korean companies with foreign buyers, a move to open tangible new markets and build global networks.
I'm looking for some like brandings and or looking at some products, anything, any business that is like matching together, and then it's a good thing for me also that I can look to Korea local products and also the entertainment as well. That is one thing that I feel like Korea is like #1 in Asians.
The first day also included a panel session to discuss music networking in Asia and signed off with a K-pop concert headlined by K-pop group aespa.
The Korean wave is having a strong impact on the world, but we shouldn't stop here. We felt the need to find ways to connect it with other industries, like tourism and resource diplomacy. If we can grow together with our industries, I believe MyK could become a key asset for Korea's future.
A global conference also brought together cultural industry leaders to discuss the future of Hallyu, alongside performances and a major closing concert, drawing the curtain on a festival that celebrates not just Korean content, but Korea's place on the world stage. Pyongyang, Arirang News.
And it's time now for a weekly installment of stories to celebrate 6 decades of diplomatic relations between Seoul and Tokyo. Today we touch upon K-literature and its appeal to readers in neighboring Japan. My colleague An Sung-jin files this report.
On a rainy street in Tokyo, a sign with the word tech colored in red stands out. This is a street in Jinbocho, known as one of the world's oldest bookstore districts, located in Tokyo, and also where the only Korean bookstore in the district stands. But Tech거리 is more than a bookstore. It's a gateway to Korea. When Kim Sung-bok opened her first publishing company in 2007, Hallyu had only just arrived in Japan. Some told her that her endeavor to introduce it was useless, but Kim said she had faith.
Through these small efforts, a lot more people began to notice us. It's been deeply rewarding to see Japan's publishing industry recognize our work and have Japanese readers seek out Korean literature. Even literary critics here finally acknowledged its value as well.
Ranging from novels, essays, and poetry to picture books, now there are more than 1,000 books to quench the desire of Korean learners and Korean culture enthusiasts in the bookstore. She has been running since 2015. Kim's first translated book, published here in Japan, was Hangang's The Vegetarian. She said that of all the works she read in the 2000s, this novel stood out the most due to its powerful resonance with Japanese society.
Did Hanggang become famous because of the Nobel Prize? Not really. If anything, I'd say the Nobel Committee was late to the party. But yes, after the Nobel buzz, her books sold in huge numbers with multiple reprints and strong sales. What surprised me most, though, was how many middle-aged men came in specifically to buy her books.
But she added that beyond Hangang's books, as Korea's cultural standing has risen tremendously, there's a genuine admiration for Korea's creative content, which helps those like Kim working in content and publishing. There are also trends in literature that show parallels between Korea and Japan.
Right now, there's a growing interest in caregiving here in Japan, and I've been pitching some of these books to publishers. We're also seeing a wave of feminist books and essays exploring new forms of family, a theme that feels timely and also resonates with what Japanese readers are interested in today.
And to further fuel interest, from poetry readings, workshops, and author visits, the bookstore offers a bridge to mutual understanding. This publisher hosts around 100 events annually to introduce Korean literature to the Japanese public.
What's appealing about Korean literature is that you can clearly sense the writer's perspective on the history of societal issues. So, through their works, you're able to see various aspects of Korea's past and present. If more translations of other genres like poetry or comics were introduced, I think that could spark a wider interest.
I'm currently studying Korean literature translation through the S.KOREA translation class. I'm interested in Korean literature or novels because it often delves deep into social issues and the inner humanity of human nature.
As Korean literature continues to find its voice in Japan, through committed publishers like Kim, aspiring translators, and communities like Tech거리, what was once marginal is becoming mainstream. With trends and stories that speak across borders, literature is becoming a tool to broaden the cultural landscape. An Sung-jin, Arirang News, Tokyo.
This is The World Now, bringing you the latest stories from around the globe. A devastating suicide bombing at an Orthodox church in Damascus, Syria, killed at least 22 and wounded dozens more. On Sunday local time, a lone attacker, believed to be affiliated with the Islamic State group, opened fire and then detonated an explosive vest, killing worshippers at the Mar Elias church. According to Syria's health ministry, at least 63 others were wounded in the attack. It was the first suicide bombing targeting a church in Damascus since Bashar al-Assad's government fell.
Reports suggest a second man may have been involved. Syrian authorities condemned the attack, calling it an act of terrorism. Syrian interim President Ahmed al-Shara has repeatedly said he will protect minorities. However, Syria has already seen deadly sectarian violence in recent months. Spain has secured an exemption from NATO's new defense spending goal of 5% of GDP ahead of a summit in The Hague. On Sunday, June 22nd, Spain's Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez announced that Spain and NATO finalized the opt-out after an exchange of letters with NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte. Now, members excluding Spain will be subject to the 5% spending target. Last year, Spain spent 1.28% of its GDP on defense, the alliance's lowest. Sanchez pledged to raise that to 2.1% this year, affirming that this level is sufficient to meet its contribution to NATO without undermining Spain's welfare state commitments. Sanchez argued escalating to 5% by 2035 would be disproportionate and unnecessary, potentially forcing deep cuts in social services or higher taxes. Pope Leo XIV issued a powerful appeal during Sunday's prayers in St. Peter's Square, saying every member of the international community has a moral responsibility to stop the tragedy of war before it becomes an irreparable abyss. He spoke amid escalating U.S. and Israeli strikes on Iran, warning that no military victory can compensate for the pains of mothers, the fear of children, the stolen future. Describing the situation in the Middle East as alarming, the Pope urged diplomacy to replace weapons and criticized how humanitarian suffering risked being overshadowed. Millions of people across the world celebrated the 11th International Day of Yoga on Saturday under this year's theme of Yoga for One Earth, One Health. In India, crowds gathered nationwide, with Prime Minister Narendra Modi leading a massive session at a stretch of beach in the city of Visakhapatnam. In Rio de Janeiro, Brazil, sunrise yoga sessions brought hundreds to Aparador Beach, uniting locals and tourists. Indonesia's Bali Nusa Dua hosted organized group practices, also drawing enthusiasts. The annual event was first celebrated in 2015 following a United Nations declaration to highlight yoga's benefits. Choi Ji-hee, Arirang News.
It was hotter than yesterday as the hot sun shined all over the country today. The daytime temperature of 32 degrees Celsius in Seoul was about 3 degrees higher than yesterday. The temperature in Yangon rose as high as 33 degrees during the day today. Please take good care of your health. It started raining again in Jeju Island this afternoon. It will rain nationwide tomorrow. Starting with the south coast at dawn tomorrow, rain will spread to the southern parts of the country tomorrow morning and to the central regions in the afternoon. This rain will continue until Wednesday. Tomorrow morning, Seoul will start off at 23 degrees, Daegu and Busan 20 degrees. Daily highs will move up to 30 degrees in Seoul and Chuncheon, 24 degrees in Gwangju, Gyeongju, and Busan. More rain is expected mainly in the central parts of the country this weekend. That's all for Korea. Here are the weather conditions around the world.
Right, those are the headlines at this hour here in South Korea. As always, thank you for watching.
How to survive in Korea. Cafes. Step 1. Find a seat.
Before ordering, find a seat. Laptop ID, smartphone, jacket, whatever that can mark your territory. But no bites. It's a little too big. Step 2. Pick up. We do not ask or call your name. We call out, B69 고객님. The buzzer will vibrate when your order is ready at the counter. Wait, got your straw? Keep the top of the wrapper on. Doing this is more hygienic. Step 3. Cafe etiquette. If you need to use your laptop, find a seat next to a socket. No extra charge for using electricity. But if you're staying over 3 hours, how about ordering another drink or dessert? Step 4. Last bite standing. There's a mysterious custom in Korea. The last bite standing. When there's about 1 bite left of that cake, nobody will go for it. You might be tempted, but don't be hasty. Right before you get up, take the last piece, saying that you simply can't waste food, or just leave it. It will save a few calories. Did you survive at the cafe? Did someone behind the counter catch your eye? Go for the same drink every single day.
오늘도 아이스 말차 라떼 드실 거죠?
You might make an impression.
해금은 2줄로 된 현악기인데 저도 처음에 시작하게 된 거는 그 2줄에서 너무 다양한 소리가 나오는 게 너무 신기했고 일단 해금이 되게 사람의 목소리랑 좀 비슷하다고 많이들 하세요. 줄을 눌러서 이렇게 음을 계속 왔다 갔다 진동하는 그런 형태를 띠고 있다 보니까 애절하다라고 많이 말씀을 해주시는 것 같아요. 이 곡은 제가 좀 오래 좋아했던 친구에 대한 제 여러 감정을 담은 곡인데요. 슬펐던 마음 혹은 뭐 고마웠던 마음 이런 여러 가지 감정들을 한데 묶어서 마음이 담긴 곡이라고 할 수 있습니다. 현대적인 음악으로 이제 재구성하는 단계를 거칠 때 항상 중요하게 생각하는 거는 음악의 분위기를 해치지 않는 선에서는 전통적인 주법들, 식임새 이런 전통의 냄새라고 할까요? 맛? 이런 걸 살릴 수 있는 요소들을 좀 집어넣으려고 하는 편이에요. 저는 요새 연주하면서도 스스로가 마음도 편하고 몸도 편안한 음악들을 좀 자주 들려드리고 싶다. 제가 음악으로 위로받았던 것처럼 제가 하는 음악들로 여러분들이 좀 위로받을 수 있는 순간이 있었으면 좋겠다. 그런 무대를 만들려고 노력해야겠다라는 생각을 했던 것 같습니다.
South Korea and Japan are celebrating 60 years of diplomatic relations this year. And on Press Perspective today, we touch upon the future of their ties and more. Hello and welcome. Hope you had a good weekend. It's Monday, June 23rd here in Seoul. I'm Min Sun-hee. On this edition of Press Perspective, we talk about ties between Seoul and Tokyo as their governments mark 6 decades of diplomatic relations. For this, I have Stephen Borwick with Japanese weekly news magazine Nikkei Asia here in the studio. Stephen, welcome back.
Nice to be here. Thank you.
I also have Koichi Yonemura with Japanese newspaper The Mainichi live on the line. Koichi, as always, it's a pleasure to have you with us.
Thank you for having me.
Right, Stephen, we will start here. Let's begin with the summit, Stephen, between President Lee Jae-myung and Japanese Prime Minister Shigeru Ishiba on the sidelines of the G7 summit in Canada last week. What was addressed and what aspects of their agenda made headlines?
I think the thing that got the most domestic attention here in Korea was Lee's comment that they are kind of similar to neighbors who share a front yard. That was just like a kind of nice way of framing that despite whatever differences these two sides might have, they are located in the same part of the world. And just as one wants to get along with a neighbor for mutual benefit, it behooves both Seoul and Tokyo to try to get along. But beyond that soundbite, I think to me, the bigger context was that Lee has not always been very in favor of engagement with Japan. He comes from the sort of left-wing camp here in Korea that is, over the years, been a little bit skeptical of Japan, has kind of wanted to see deeper shows of contrition before meaningful interaction. But that's definitely not the tone that he is striking early in his term. It's a little bit surprising that just quite so early in his term, he's not made any of the kinds of criticisms of Japan that he's made in the past. He was quite critical of previous President Yoon Suk-yeol's summitry with Japan, and he kind of argued that Yoon was yielding too much and was failing to get a proper response from Japan that and he was sort of pushing the idea that more engagement with Japan should be contingent on these progress in these other areas, like on historical issues and some of the other things that have customarily complicated ties. And then just another bit that Lee said that I thought was noteworthy was he said that cooperation between Seoul and Tokyo is particularly important amid a changing international environment. And he didn't specify exactly what he meant there, but we can probably take that to mean as we're seeing conflict in the Middle East, as we are seeing the effects of tariffs imposed by the United States, there's a lot of challenges in the world, and in South Korea and Japan, you have these two export-dependent market economies, both of which have to import all of their energy, both of which are dealing with demographic challenges. And so at this point, Lee seems to be pretty convinced that it makes sense for him to cooperate with Japan. And for somebody like me, just like an international observer, somebody who's not from this part of the world, I've long hoped that the governments in both countries would see how much they have in common and see that it would really be in both of their best interests to try to work together. So I think it's early in Lee's term, I think we have a kind of somewhat unexpectedly positive start.
Right. And Koichi, what were your takeaways from this summit between the leaders of South Korea and Japan over in Canada last week?
Actually, I just totally agreed with what Stephen said. And also, the main takeaway is that both countries agreed on the growing need for cooperation. And of course, as Stephen mentioned, that this comes in the context of global instability, such as US-China tensions, Middle East, and Trump tariffs, and also Russia's invasion of Ukraine. So as the international order becomes more unstable, obviously, the two countries are being drawn closer, whether they like it or not. So they share the view that cooperation is no longer optional. That's my understanding. And also, to support this, they agree to carefully manage historical issues that have caused repeated tension. And also, they aim to, instead, they aim to increase areas of practical cooperation. So, and they also reaffirmed the importance of shuttle diplomacy. And this was a bit surprising because this was former President Yoon restarted the practice, and President Lee Jae-myung also expressed this time his intention to continue. it may be one of the good example of President Lee Jae-myung's practical diplomacy, 실용 외교.
Right. Koichi, Prime Minister Shigeru Ishiba also attended a reception hosted by the South Korean embassy in Tokyo last Thursday to commemorate the two countries' 60th anniversary of diplomatic relations. Could you tell us a bit about the message he sought to share with the people there?
Well, his message is like the summit, focused on cooperation. Personally, what stood out for me was his mention of shared domestic issues like aging and shrinking population, and also rural revitalization. Definitely, both countries, we have to tackle same issues. And what was surprising was Ishiba has just returned from G7 in Canada, and I heard that from government official that Ishiba himself insisted to adjust his schedule to attend the reception, and not only the Prime Minister Ishiba, but the former Prime Minister Kishida and Suga also attended, and so did 6 current cabinet members, including the Chief Cabinet Secretary, Foreign Minister, and Defense Minister. This level of attendance was unusual, and of course, one reason may be that Korea's ambassador to Japan, Ambassador Park Cho-hee, is very well known in Japanese political circles as a distinguished political scholar. But more broadly, it also signaled that the Japanese government takes relationships with South Korea very seriously.
Right, good to know, Koichi. Stephen, a similar reception was hosted by the Japanese embassy here in Seoul last Tuesday. Now, fortunately, President Lee Jae-myung was in Canada and unable to attend, but I believe he did send a message to mark the occasion. Could you tell us a bit about that?
Yeah, he sent a video message, and I mean, I think we could say a lot of the same things about this event that we could say that Koichi-san just laid out when it comes to the event taking place in the other country. The takeaway, it was all very diplomatic speak in terms of, wanting to have a future-oriented view, kind of commemorating the past 60 years and then pledging to work together for 60 more years. Nothing in it was particularly surprising, but just looking at it a little more closely, I thought it was noteworthy that Lee used the term key partners. He said, the two countries are key partners when it comes to their economy, when it comes to various other things. I think he positively, perhaps not in this message, but he has also positively alluded to trilateral defense cooperation with the U.S. As we mentioned earlier, this is a little bit uncharacteristic for Lee, and it seems to me that from him, it's a kind of recognition of the challenges of the current moment and just how it makes sense for the two sides to kind of see themselves as having common interests. And yes, it's the kind of realization of what Lee has called his practical or pragmatic approach to foreign policy. That's going to be what he described as interest-based, so that he's going to look at every bilateral relationship or every kind of multilateral engagement through the lens of how to best serve South Korea's national interest, and that's on display here.
Right, and against this backdrop of perhaps a greater climate of cooperation between the two governments. I hear a survey, Stephen, by your agency Nikkei Asia and South Korea's Mail business newspaper found that companies in the two countries are looking to substantially boost cooperation. Could you tell us a bit about that?
Sure. Well, we got to talk about what the data says and also what it doesn't say. I mean, the kind of headline takeaway that something like 40% of companies surveys say that they plan to step up cooperation. There was that, but I would also flag that if you look a little bit further down the results, it also says that there are none of them who plan to reduce their cooperation. So the ones that do not answer that they're going to step up cooperation, there could be a range of reasons for that. It's not necessarily because of anything in the political environment. It's not because they wish to make a statement on the state of affairs in the bilateral relationship. This is business. It's distinct from diplomacy. But I think what the data tells us is that there is a fair bit of overlap, and there's a fair bit of potential for interchange between the two sides. I don't have the trade data in front of me, but as we all know, in 2019 there was a quite extensive boycott movement in South Korea, where on a commercial level, like on a company-to-company level, due to some government restrictions, and also on a person-to-person level when it came to consumer behavior and travel back and forth, there was a significant reduction in cross-border economic interchange. That's clearly no longer the case. It seems as though those tensions have subsided, and perhaps with the background of the international challenges that we've alluded to earlier, businesses on both sides are seeing that in an age of when trade is getting more expensive, when trade is getting more fraught in any number of ways, especially when we see what's happening with the Middle East and the possible allusions to restrictions in the Strait of Hormuz, and these two countries their economies being reliant on shipping things out and getting things in. There's just a fertile ground for them to explore possibly easing those complications by working directly with each other. So I think it's all just common sense at this point.
Right, for sure. Meanwhile, Koichi, on the defense front, South Korea, Japan and the US last week conducted an aerial drill, I believe. What is the significance of such joint training sessions, keeping in mind, of course, the evolving geopolitical landscape?
Yes, on June 18, the US, South Korea and Japan had a joint air drill in international waters of south of Jeju Island, and South Korea's F-15 and the US F-16 and Japan's F-2 fighters participated. And they said that the goal was to strengthen deterrence against North Korea and North Korea's nuclear and missile threats. But what is significant was this was the first trilateral military exercise since President Lee Jae-myung took office. So that gives some symbolic importance, and including Mainichi, Japanese media also highlighted that point in our coverage.
Koichi, also on the topic of defense, the Financial Times claims that Japan cancelled a 2+2 defense and diplomatic meeting with the US following the Trump administration's demand for greater defense spending. Could you give us some context behind this cancellation, its broader implications?
Yes. Well, the Financial Times reported that the meeting was planned for what I remember was July 1st. The US was expected to ask Japan to raise its defense spending to 3.5% of GDP. And to avoid political pressure ahead of the upper house election on July 20th, Japan asked for a delay or postpone the meeting. That's the FT's reports. And I'm not 100% sure that the number 3.5%, if it was 3.5% or they expressed the number or not, but it's definitely Japan is facing. I think U.S. is trying to how can I say, push Japan to budget hike, and currently Japan is facing its first major inflation in 30 years. So as people's daily lives get harder, big defense budget hike could be unpopular. And Japan's defense budget for 2025 will be about 1.8% of GDP, including related costs. And Japanese defense budget has already jumped from 5.4 trillion yen in 2022 to 9.8 trillion yen in 2025. So looking at these circumstances, reaching to 3.5% or more would be very difficult. And also today, Prime Minister Ishiba, Japanese government announced that Prime Minister Ishiba's attendance of NATO summit, it was cancelled. And looking at Australia and South Korea and Japan, all three countries, the cancellation of the attending NATO summit, I think it is somewhat related to this defense budget thing.
Right, and keeping that in mind, Stephen, then how might potential talks between South Korea and the U.S. with regard to defense spending play out, do you think?
Wow, that's a big question, and it's kind of strong element of speculation. So, I mean, the short answer is we don't exactly know without knowing the details. But just last week, South Korea's defense ministry pushed back on this being implored to raise its defense spending to 5% of GDP by just pointing out that it's already very high compared to a lot of other U.S. allies, and that like a fairly large percentage of the South Korean GDP already goes to, not just spending on Korean forces, but also the cost of hosting U.S. troops here. I mean, there's a number of things that we could say about this. The Pentagon has pushed this 5% number as a kind of what they want to institute as a kind of global standard. I would step back and I would make a kind of general statement about international relations where, like, if you have one country that is dealing with all of its allies and pushing what they see as a kind of uniform standard, that's bound to engender some kind of pushback because of the particulars of each of these relationships. You're inevitably going to have countries that say, we do not wish to fall under this standard rubric because of reasons A, B, and C, because there are different elements at work in our relationship. And I think that's just what the South Korean Defense Ministry is trying to do here. They're just pointing out, as they have, I mean, this is going on years now. This is going like since before Trump was elected, like even to his first term as president, when officials here have objected to his depiction of South Korea as like unfairly taking advantage of U.S. generosity when it comes to defense spending. So when these talks do go ahead, I would just flag that, like, Trump would presumably not be in the room. This would be carried out by people who are experts on defense and who understand the granular details of how the two sides have over the decades customarily shared the burden for these things. Bigger picture, like, might it come out with South Korea agreeing to shoulder a larger percentage? That's a plausible scenario. But I think when the alliance is very old, the alliance has a lot of history, the alliance has a lot of components. I've been at plenty of events where defense officials from the U.S. and South Korea are celebrating or commemorating some, we're going to see the anniversary of the Korean War on Wednesday. I'll probably be covering some events. There's a lot here. These are people who have known each other for a very long time, and I think who, despite the outstanding comments by some Trump administration officials, they both, I think, consider their relationships to be mutually complementary and of serving this bigger goal of deterring North Korea and, kind of maintaining the free movement of goods and people in this pivotal region. So I do think that we might see South Korea agreeing to some concessions that it previously had not been keen to agree to, but I don't see a wholesale reorientation of the alliance.
Right. Koichi, back on Seoul-Tokyo ties as we celebrate 60 years of diplomatic relations. Let's quickly touch upon the ordinary people. Koichi, how has the public perception within Japan about South Korea shifted perhaps over the past decade? I mean, are there any generational differences in attitudes?
Well, a very good joint survey by Asahi Shimbun and Tonga Ilbo was released a couple of days ago, I guess yesterday. Unfortunately, it's not from Mainichi or Nikkei, but it was a good survey. And according to that survey, in Japan, those who said they like South Korea rose from 10% in 2015 to 19%, up 9 points in 2025. And also those who said they dislike South Korea dropped from 26% to 12%. That's Japan side. And South Korean side, people who like Japan rose from 5% to 23%, and dislike fell from 50% to 23%. So in both countries, and over half of also respondents had neutral feelings. While historical issues and rivalry remain, cultural exchanges has deepened. Many people now enjoy each other's music, drama, and anime. This has led to, how can I say, more balanced views, neither overly positive nor negative. That's my understanding of, about more than 50%, more than half of respondents had neutral feelings. And in general, if we look at the generations, the younger generations tend to be more positive, of course. In 2024, this is a different survey. In 2024, a Japanese government survey shows 72.5% of Japanese aged 18 to 29 said they feel very friendly, or somewhat friendly towards South Korea, the highest among age groups. And the lowest was 50.1% among those in their 40s. But interestingly, 59% of those aged over 70 expressed positive feelings towards South Korea. So I can't say older age doesn't necessarily, older age doesn't necessarily mean lower support. Perhaps my understanding is if you have more free time, then that time allows to enjoy Korean music and Korean drama, and gives you some positive attitudes towards South Korea.
Right, Koichi, quite a number of pundits here in the country also say that cultural diplomacy has served to bring the two countries together. All right, thank you so much, Koichi, for your time and your thoughts today.
Thank you.
Right, and here in the studio, Stephen, thank you very much for your insights.
Thank you.
All right, well, on that note, we end this edition of Press Perspective. As always, thank you for watching.